The Biker's Rest was not a place for the faint of heart. It was a bar carved from rough-hewn timber and a reputation for being a rowdy, boisterous place. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and the faint scent of motor oil. The patrons were a mix of weathered bikers, gruff old men who had seen too many miles, and the occasional lost tourist who had wandered in by mistake. No one messed with the bikers. They were a brotherhood, a close-knit group who had their own rules, their own codes, and their own way of settling things. One evening, a woman walked in. She was a ghost in this place, a simple woman who seemed to have stepped out of a different world entirely. She was dressed in a worn flannel shirt, a pair of jeans, and a pair of old, scuffed hiking boots. She was not a biker, she was not a barfly. She was a person who was just passing through, a woman who seemed more comfortable with the quiet of the forest than the chaos of a bar. She ordered a single beer and sat in a corner booth, a silent, unassuming presence in a place that was anything but silent or unassuming. The bikers watched her with a mixture of suspicion and amusement. They did not like outsiders, and this woman was a complete outsider. The leader of the pack, a man named Snake, a hulking giant with a bald head and a long, braided beard, decided to have some fun. He was a man who lived for intimidation, a person who derived his power from making others feel small. He swaggered over to her booth, his boots thudding on the wooden floor, and stood over her, his shadow a dark presence over her small frame. "What are you doing here, little bird?" he growled, his voice a low rumble. "This is not your kind of place." The woman looked up at him, her face calm and placid. "I am just passing through," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I am having a drink." Snake laughed, a loud booming sound that made the other bikers laugh with him. "A drink," he sneered. "You do not look like you can hold your liquor. Why do not you go home to your husband and let the real men drink in peace?" he said, his words a public humiliation. The woman did not respond. She just took a sip of her beer, her silence a challenge to his arrogance. Snake, his pride wounded by her lack of fear, decided to escalate. He reached out a large, calloused hand and grabbed her shirt by the collar. The fabric, old and worn, tore with a sharp ripping sound, a noise that was as loud as a gunshot in the suddenly silent bar. The woman froze. The beer she was holding spilled onto the table. Snake laughed, a triumphant, cruel sound. "Now go home," he said, "before you get hurt." But the woman was not looking at him. She was looking at the tear in her shirt, a long, ragged line that had revealed a part of her she had kept hidden. The bikers who had been watching the scene, their faces a mix of amusement and a morbid curiosity, now stood up, their bodies tense, their eyes wide with a new, dawning horror. Snake, emboldened by his victory, reached out to push her away, but his hand froze in midair. He was looking at her arm, the arm that was now visible through the tear in her shirt. There, on her bicep, was a tattoo. It was not a small, dainty tattoo. It was a large, intricate piece of art, a symbol that was known and revered all over the world. It was the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. It was a symbol of honor, of courage, of a dedication to a cause that was bigger than any man. And below it, etched in black ink, were the words, United States Marine Corps. The bar was completely silent. The jukebox, which had been playing a loud, classic rock song, seemed to have gone quiet. Every biker, every patron, every person in that room was staring at her arm, their faces a mix of disbelief and a profound, chilling realization. The woman they had just humiliated, the simple woman in the flannel shirt, was not a simple woman at all. She was a Marine. Snake's hand, which had been reaching for her, now hung in the air, a useless appendage. The bravado, the arrogance, the power he had so proudly displayed just a moment ago. It was all gone. His face, which had been a mask of cruelty, was now a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. He was a man who had made his living by intimidation, and he had just tried to intimidate a United States Marine. He was a man who had no idea what he had done. He was a man who had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The woman, who had been a silent observer, now spoke. Her voice, which had been so quiet before, now filled the room with a cold, clear authority. "You will apologize to me." "Sir," she said, her eyes once placid, now a burning fire. "And you will buy me a new shirt." Now, Snake, a man who had never apologized for anything in his life, just stood there, frozen. The other bikers, his so-called brotherhood, took a step back, their faces a mix of shame and a desperate need to distance themselves from his stupidity. They were not going to mess with a Marine. A biker might be tough, but a Marine was a different kind of tough. A Marine was a force of nature, a person who had been trained to fight, to endure, to win. They were not just soldiers, they were the best of the best, and they were not to be trifled with. Snake, with a face full of shame and a body full of fear, did the only thing he could do. He nodded. He walked to the bar, bought her a new beer, and placed it in front of her. He then went to the corner of the bar and pulled a black leather jacket from a hook. He walked back to her and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I did not know." The woman took the jacket. It was old, but it was clean. She put it on and it fit her perfectly. She was a woman who was a stranger to this place, and now she was wearing the uniform of a biker. The bar was still silent, the patrons watching the scene with a mix of awe and bewilderment. The woman, a Marine, had walked into a den of wolves and had turned them into sheep. She had not used violence. She had not used force. She had just revealed who she was. And that revelation was more powerful than any punch or kick. She was a reminder that you should not judge a book by its cover, that the person you think is a victim could be a warrior, that the person you think is weak could be the strongest person in the room. The woman, now a symbol of respect and a living legend, finished her beer. She stood up, a small, knowing smile on her lips. She walked to the door, and as she left, the bar was still silent. She had come in a stranger, and she had left a hero. She was a Marine, and she had taught a biker and an entire bar a lesson they would never forget. A simple woman in a flannel shirt had just shown them that true strength was not about muscle or intimidation, but about honor, about courage, and about the quiet power of a person who knows who they are. She was not just a woman, she was a Marine, and she had just won a war with a single tattoo. The night did not end there for Snake. The unspoken rules of the Biker's Rest were clear. You do not mess with a Marine, you do not mess with a veteran, and you do not mess with someone who has earned their stripes in a war far away. Snake had broken all three rules in a single, stupid moment of arrogance. His brotherhood, which had been his source of power and his shield against the world, was now his judge and jury. They did not physically harm him. They did not need to. The punishment was far more profound. They exiled him. They told him he was no longer welcome at the bar, no longer a part of their brotherhood, and no longer a person they would ride with. He was a pariah, a man who had lost his honor in a single, humiliating moment. He was no longer Snake. He was just a man with a beard and a tattoo he had not earned. The woman, whose name was Sarah, continued her journey. She was a veteran of 2 tours of duty, a sergeant who had led her squad through some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She had left the military to find a life of peace, a quiet existence where she was not defined by her past. The flannel shirt was a symbol of that new life, a uniform of her own choosing. The tattoo was a reminder of her past, a symbol of who she had been and who she would always be. She did not go looking for trouble, but she was not a person who would run from it either. The Biker's Rest was just a detour on her long, lonely road, a place where she had to remind someone of a simple, universal truth, that some people are just built different. The story of the woman in the flannel shirt, the Marine with the tattoo, spread far and wide. It was told around campfires, in truck stops, and in bars all over the country. The story was a legend, a testament to the power of a single moment, a reminder that honor and respect were not given. They were earned. The Biker's Rest, which had once been a place of intimidation and fear, was now a place of a different kind of respect. The bikers were still gruff. They were still a brotherhood, but they were a brotherhood with a new set of rules. They were more cautious, more respectful, and they were always on the lookout for a person who was not what they seemed to be. They had learned a valuable lesson that night, a lesson that had been taught to them by a simple woman in a torn shirt and a single tattoo. Sarah's journey led her to a small town on the coast, a place of quiet fishing boats and a peaceful, rhythmic life. She found a job at a small boatyard. Her hands, which had once been trained to hold a rifle, were now trained to work with wood and metal. She built her own life, a simple, peaceful existence that was a world away from the chaos she had known. She did not talk about her past. She did not wear her tattoo on her sleeve. She was a person who was just trying to live. But her past was always a part of her, a silent reminder of the battles she had fought and the person she had become. One day, a young boy from the town came to the boatyard. He had a worn book in his hand, a book about the history of the United States Marines. "My dad told me about you," he said, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and hero worship. "He said you are a legend." Sarah just smiled. She did not deny it. She did not boast. She just told him a story about the Corps, a story about a brotherhood, a story about honor and courage. She did not talk about the bar. She did not talk about the humiliation. She talked about the things that truly mattered. She was not just a Marine. She was a teacher, a person who was passing on a legacy of honor to a new generation. The Biker's Rest, which had been a den of wolves, was now a place of honor. Snake, who had once been the king of the pack, was now a ghost, a pariah who had learned a hard lesson. And Sarah, the simple woman in the flannel shirt, was a legend. She had not used violence. She had not used force. She had just revealed who she was. And that revelation was more powerful than any punch or kick. She was a reminder that you should not judge a book by its cover, that the person you think is a victim could be a warrior, that the person you think is weak could be the strongest person in the room. She was a Marine, and she had just won a war with a single tattoo.